You don't need another love quote. You need the rule that psychology confirms every heartbroken woman ignored. And it's the same reason she's still stuck. The truth is, most women in heartbreak aren't lacking romantic advice. They've heard it all. The real problem is that there's one core principle they never applied, even though it was staring them in the face the whole time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's when everything about love, loss, and moving forward changes. When you look at your last relationship that broke your heart and compare it to the ones before that did the same, you start to see the same pattern forming like a vicious cycle. That always starts the same way, with attraction and never ends. Attraction gives into hope. Hope gives into confusion. Confusion gives into pain. And pain pulls you right back into hoping in someone again. For many, heartbreak doesn't begin with the breakup itself. It starts much earlier. Most heartbreak doesn't come from what happened. It comes from what she made it mean. That meaning often turns one person into a symbol of everything she's been longing for, even if the reality doesn't match. This interpretation rarely comes from facts. Instead, it's usually built on fantasy. Moments replayed in her mind, gestures amplified into proof, words taken as lifelong promises. These interpretations create a storyline in which the other person plays the perfect role, regardless of how they actually showed up. Once that fantasy takes root, the cycle begins. Attraction creates a spark. Hope feeds the vision. Confusion settles in when actions and words clash. Pain follows, and then the loop resets. Each round feels different in the moment, yet in hindsight it's just the same story playing out with slightly different details. And when you've been through that loop enough times, you start noticing something. There's always a pattern hiding underneath the story you told yourself. The details change, the faces change, the timeline changes, and the rhythm of it stays the same. That's why the only way to break it is to stop chasing what you hope someone could be and start paying attention to what they consistently are. This brings us to the rule you should never ignore again. Believe the pattern, not the potential. The pattern is always more reliable than the promises. He said he loved you, but he disappeared. He was amazing sometimes, but cruel often. He could be the one, if only he changed. This is the lie, believing potential over reality. It's a seductive lie because potential offers endless what-ifs that can be shaped into any outcome you want. However, psychology confirms that women with anxious attachment tend to ignore obvious red flags because they are chemically hooked on the hope that things will improve. That hope can feel more intoxicating than the actual relationship. When you focus on what could happen instead of what is happening, you train yourself to accept inconsistency as normal. The brain starts valuing rare highs over the constant lows, which is why even painful relationships can feel impossible to leave. Knowing you should believe the pattern is one thing. Actually doing it is something else entirely. Even when the facts are clear, there's a pull that keeps you holding on, as if letting go would erase every good moment you had. Which is why we're going to look at why this rule is so hard to follow. The difficulty isn't about intelligence or awareness. It's about biology and emotion working together. When emotions run high, the brain doesn't show you the plain truth. It projects possibility. This is a survival mechanism wired to seek connection, even when that connection harms you. In those moments, you're not seeing the person for who they consistently are. You're seeing who they might become if all the best moments were the rule instead of the exception. The imagination fills in every gap with ideal scenarios that never consistently materialize. This is why you fall for the story instead of the reality. The narrative you've built in your head is warmer, safer, and more appealing than the facts. Breaking away from it feels like losing not just the person, but the entire future you imagined together. Now let's look at how ignoring this rule leads to repetition. The pain doesn't only come from them leaving, it comes from refusing to accept who they really were. That refusal plants the seed for the same story to grow again. Every time you turn away from the facts, you give the fantasy more power, and that fantasy doesn't fade on its own. It lingers, keeping you emotionally tied to a version of them that never truly existed. When you stay loyal to that imagined version, the obsession deepens. You replay conversations, dissect their mixed signals, and search for hidden meanings that might prove they cared more than they showed. Eventually, all that energy turns inward as self-blame. The mind starts asking, Why wasn't I enough? As if your value could be measured by someone else's ability to show up consistently, when in reality, their pattern had nothing to do with your worth. If this goes unchecked, you'll walk straight into new relationships with the same dynamic, just dressed in a different body and voice. The emotional familiarity feels like attraction, yet it's really a pull toward what's already hurt you before. It's the comfort of chaos disguised as chemistry. Until you choose to believe the pattern over the potential, you're not breaking the cycle. You're just casting new actors in the same painful role. What happens when you follow it? When you believe the pattern, you stop chasing closure. You stop fantasizing about apologies, changes, or future versions. Those imagined moments, the heartfelt message, the sudden transformation, the "I finally get it" confession, lose their grip on you. Instead of waiting for them to become the person you hoped they'd be, you start looking at the person they have consistently shown you. You start making decisions based on data, not delusion. You measure the relationship by how it feels most of the time, not by the rare highs that made you forget the lows. That shift strips away the need to bargain with reality. You're no longer trying to negotiate a different ending or rewrite their character. You're working with what's actually there. Following this rule gives you something you might not have felt in a long time: control over your own emotional energy. You can walk away earlier, with less damage to heal from, because you see the truth while you still have the strength to act on it. The cycle stops being something that happens to you, and starts being something you refuse to feed. And when you've lived by this rule long enough, something deeper starts to happen. That trust changes the way you see people, the way you set boundaries, and the way you handle anyone who shows you who they are. This brings you to the most powerful shift. At some point, the heartbreak turns into clarity. Heartbreak turns into wisdom when you can finally say, "He showed me who he was. I just refused to believe him." That single realization transforms the entire story. When that happens, you no longer need to keep replaying the good moments to justify staying. You no longer wonder if you were the problem, because the pattern showed the truth from the start. Accepting that truth means you can trust yourself again, and that trust is the foundation of real healing. Without it, you risk going back to the same dynamics over and over. With it, you create a boundary so strong that the same situation never gets the chance to hurt you twice. Ignoring this rule doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your trust in yourself. But the moment you stop chasing potential is the moment you stop settling for pain. Have you ever ignored the pattern because the potential looked too good? Drop a heart if you've been there, and send this to someone who's finally ready to stop hurting.